spent 40 years being very good at the wrong thing. That is the sentence I keep coming back to when I try to understand how I ended up here sitting in a rented apartment in Manila at 69 years old, $395,000 lighter, staring at a ceiling that belongs to someone else, and asking myself what exactly I thought I was buying, not the money itself. I understand now, finally and too late, that the money was never the thing I was reaching for. It was just the instrument I knew how to use. The problem was that I kept using it on things that couldn't receive it, and Sienna Lopez was the last and most expensive of those things. My name is Trevor Blackstone. I retired 18 months ago after 40 years in corporate executive roles, operations, logistics, supply chain at the senior level, the kind of work that looks impressive on a biography and produces a comfortable life and leaves a man at 68 wondering, when the calendar finally clears, what any of it was actually for. I made good money. I spent it on the things that successful people in New York spend money on: the apartment on the Upper East Side, the house in Connecticut that we used 4 weekends a year, the schools for my 2 daughters, the restaurants and the clubs and the international travel that was always attached to work and therefore never quite felt like living. I was not unhappy in any dramatic sense. I was just consistently, quietly aware that the life I was building did not feel the way I had expected it to feel when I was younger and building toward it. My marriage to Patricia ended in 2015, not dramatically but completely. We had spent so long being 2 people who lived parallel lives in the same household that when we finally said it out loud and moved toward separate addresses, it was more like acknowledging something that had already happened than making something happen. We remain on civil terms. Our daughters, Natalie and Claire, managed the divorce with the particular practicality of adult children who had seen it coming from further away than their parents had. I moved into a smaller apartment, kept working, and continued to defer the question of what I actually wanted from my life by remaining very busy with the mechanics of living it. When I retired in the spring of 2022, the question was no longer deferrable. I had time, more of it than I had ever had as an adult, and money, and no particular idea what to do with either in combination. I had read enough about retirement to know that the transition was difficult for men who had organized their identity around professional achievement, and I believed I understood that intellectually, and understanding it intellectually turned out to be exactly as useful as understanding intellectually that a fall from a height will hurt. The knowledge does not cushion the landing. I spent the first 3 months in the Connecticut house that I had bought out from the divorce settlement, walking the property and reading books I had always intended to read and having dinners with people I had always intended to spend more time with, and feeling a hollowness that no amount of activity or comfort could quite fill. A colleague of mine, a man named Gerald, who had retired 2 years before me, had relocated to the Philippines. He called me in August of 2022 and said, without much preamble, "Trevor, I know what you're doing and I know how it feels, and I'm telling you to come out here for a month before you make any permanent decisions about your life." Gerald has a directness that I have always valued. I booked a flight 2 weeks later. Manila was not what I expected. I had expected something gentler, a retirement destination, manageable and comfortable. What I found was a city with a density of life that was almost aggressive, noise and color and human presence at every turn, the specific energy of a place that has not organized itself around the comfort of visitors. I did not find it unpleasant. I found it clarifying in a way that the Connecticut house with its tasteful quiet was not. In Manila, I was not retired Trevor Blackstone with too much time and too many rooms. I was just a man in a city, which is a simpler thing to be. I met Sienna Lopez in my 3rd week. Gerald had suggested a fitness center near the apartment I was renting in BGC. "Good facilities," he said, and he was not wrong. I had let my physical routine slide badly in the first months of retirement, and I needed the structure of a scheduled commitment more than I needed the exercise itself. Sienna was one of the personal trainers on staff. She was 33 years old, Filipina, and she had the specific authority that good fitness professionals carry in ease with the body and its mechanics, a directness about what works and what doesn't that does not leave room for the ego negotiations that softer conversations allow. She assessed my current condition without flattery, and outlined what she thought a realistic program would involve and how long it would take to see meaningful results. I appreciated the absence of salesmanship. She was just telling me the truth. We trained together 3 times a week for the first month. The sessions were entirely professional. She was good at her work, attentive, knowledgeable, responsive to what I was and was not capable of without making either a production. After a month, I was sleeping better, eating with more intention, and moving through the city with an energy I had not felt in years. I told her this one morning after a session, in the straightforward way that a man tells a professional that their work has produced results. And she said, "Good. That's what it's for. No performance, no fishing for praise." She accepted the feedback and moved on. I noticed that I liked it. I am going to be honest about the progression of my feeling for Sienna because the honesty is the point of telling this story. It did not begin as romantic feeling. It began as the feeling I get when I encounter someone who is good at something and indifferent to performing that goodness for approval, a quality I had always found rare and admirable in professional contexts, and that I had not expected to find in a fitness trainer in Manila. Over the weeks of working together, she told me things about her life in the matter-of-fact way that people share information when they are comfortable but not performing comfort. She had grown up in a neighborhood in Manila that had not given her many advantages. She had put herself through a certification program by working double shifts at a call center for 2 years. She was sending money to her mother and a younger brother. She wanted, eventually, to open her own fitness studio, a small one, focused on clients who could not afford the fees at places like the one where we worked. She told me none of this as an appeal. She told me the way you tell a person you have decided to be honest with about your life. I started spending time with her outside the training sessions in November. Dinners, first, which I initiated, framing them as a thank you for the quality of the work she had put in with me. She accepted without any performance of reluctance and without any performance of eagerness either. She was the same person at dinner that she was in the gym, direct and present, and not particularly interested in saying things she did not mean. I found that quality more valuable than I can fully explain. I had spent 40 years in corporate environments where everything was framed and managed, and the distance between what people said and what they meant was a professional skill set, and here was a woman who seemed to have no interest in any of that. I started giving her money in December, not as a gift, not framed as romance, as help. She had mentioned that her brother was struggling with a tuition payment, and I offered to cover it. $3,500. She thanked me with the same restraint she brought to everything and did not bring it up again. 2 weeks later, I asked if the situation had resolved. She said yes and thanked me again. That was it. No elaboration, no ongoing gratitude performance, no reciprocal warmth engineered to encourage another contribution. I noticed the absence of those things and interpreted it as integrity. I told myself she was not the kind of person who manufactured need. I was not wrong about that. What I did not understand yet was that she did not need to manufacture need because I was manufacturing it for her. That is the mechanism I spent the longest time understanding after everything ended. Sienna did not create false emergencies or construct elaborate fictions. She did not build a fake investment vehicle or forge documents or simulate returns on my money. What she did was considerably simpler and considerably more effective. She existed, with her real life and her real circumstances and her real qualities, in close enough proximity to me that my need to make something meaningful with my money had a credible place to land. I had spent 40 years measuring the worth of my days by what I could produce and provide. When the professional context that had structured that impulse was removed, the impulse did not go with it. It just sat there, looking for somewhere to go. And Sienna, with her genuine financial pressures and her genuine ambition and her genuine indifference to performing gratitude, was close enough to real that I could tell myself I was doing something real. The travel came first. In January of 2023, I suggested we take a trip Palawan, which multiple people had told me was the most beautiful part of the Philippines and which I had been intending to see. She agreed. I paid for everything, which I presented as natural given the income difference, and which she accepted without protest or performance. We spent 10 days in Palawan, and it was genuinely beautiful, and the time together was comfortable in a way I had not experienced with another person in years. Not electric or consuming, just easy. She was good company. She was interested in things and said so clearly, and was not interested in other things and said that clearly too. I paid approximately $18,000 for the trip between flights, accommodation, activities, and the daily costs of two people living well for 10 days. I did not think about the number while I was spending it. I thought about the watercolor and the food and the fact that I was somewhere genuinely beautiful with a person whose company I valued. The money was the mechanism, not the point. But then it became the point. Not immediately and not intentionally, but gradually and undeniably. I kept going back to the act of spending as the primary way I expressed what I felt about the situation, because expressing feelings had never been something I did naturally, and spending money was something I had been doing expertly for 4 decades. I paid for 3 months of advanced training certifications she had been saving toward $22,000. I paid for a health emergency for her mother, hospitalization, surgery, recovery, $31,000. I said yes to each of these things, not because she pressed me, but because saying yes felt like doing something meaningful with what I had, and doing something meaningful with what I had was the closest I had found to the feeling I had been looking for since I stopped working. By April of 2023, I had spent $95,000 across travel and personal expenses I had covered for her and her family. I knew the number because I tracked my finances with the precision of someone who had spent a career in operations, and tracking a number does not require you to be honest with yourself about what the number means. I knew what I had spent. I told myself it was the cost of a life that was finally feeling like something, which was true, in the narrow technical sense that I was spending money and feeling things, without being true in the larger sense that the feeling was proportionate to the spending, or that the spending was producing the feeling, or that the feeling would persist. The education investment came in May. Sienna told me she had been looking at a business management degree program part-time at a private university in Manila that would give her the credentials to eventually open and manage her own studio. The program cost $85,000 over 3 years. She was not asking me to pay for it. She told me about it the way she told me about everything, as information, as a fact of her life, without emotional framing. I said I wanted to pay for it. She looked at me for a moment and said, "Trevor, that's a lot of money." I said I was aware of that. She said, "I don't want you to do it if it's going to change how you think about me." I told her it would not change how I thought about her. She said, "All right, but I want you to know I would have found another way." I told her I believed her. I transferred the money for the first semester enrollment the following week. The studio came next. In July, she brought up, tentatively, and only once, that a space had become available near a neighborhood she had been thinking about for years, affordable rent, the right size, in a community that genuinely needed accessible fitness options. She showed me photographs. The startup costs fit-out, equipment, initial operating capital totaled $115,000. She presented it not as a request but as something she was going to have to let pass because the timing was not right for her financially. I said I would cover it. She pushed back more than she had pushed back on anything before. She said she did not want to be a person who used someone else's money to build her own thing, that she needed to know it was hers in a real sense. I said we could structure it as a loan, that she could repay me over time from the studio's income. She said if I was sure. I said I was. We drafted a simple loan agreement on paper. I transferred $115,000. I want to stop here and say something about how I felt in the month after that transfer. I felt better than I had felt in years. Not because I had evidence that the money was being well used. The studio was in early stages of fitting out and I had not visited the space, but because I had done something large and purposeful with resources I had, for someone who had real plans for them. And that feeling of purposeful action was the closest thing to professional satisfaction I had found since retirement. I called Natalie in August and told her I was doing well, that I had found a rhythm in Manila that suited me, that I was feeling clearer about things than I had in a long time. She said that was good to hear. I did not tell her about the money. I told myself it was because it was my money and my business, which was true. The fuller truth was that I did not want to hear her response to the numbers. The emergencies took another $100,000 between August and November of 2023. A legal issue with the studio lease, a dispute with the previous tenant that required a payment to resolve, $35,000. A family crisis involving her younger brother, a debt situation that had become threatening in ways she described, with enough distress that I did not ask her to detail it further, $28,000. A medical situation of her own, nothing serious, she said, but requiring treatment not covered by her current insurance, $18,000. Equipment for the studio that had been damaged in delivery, the insurance claim pending but the replacement needed immediately, $19,000. Each of these came separately, each with its own story, none overlapping with the others in timing or type. I paid each one. I tracked each one. I did not add them up in a way that made me look at the total clearly until Gerald did it for me. Gerald called me in November. We had dinner and he asked directly how things were going with Sienna. I said, well. He said, how much have you spent on her? I said it was a complicated question because some of it was investment and some was personal. He said, add it up for me. I did not have the number in front of me, but I ran through it verbally, the travel, the family expenses, the education, the studio, the emergencies. And when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Trevor, you're close to $400,000. I told him I knew it was substantial. He said, it's not substantial. It's catastrophic. Have you seen the studio? I told him I had seen photographs. He said, have you been there? Has it opened? I said it was still in the fitting out phase. He said, it's been 4 months since you transferred the studio money. Fit-outs don't take 4 months. I told him construction timelines in Manila could be variable. He said, Trevor, I need you to go to the address she gave you for the studio and tell me what you find. I went the following day. The address was a real address in the neighborhood Sienna had described. The space was occupied but not by a fitness studio under any stage of development. It was a small garment business that, when I asked the owner, had been operating in that location for 3 years without interruption. No lease had changed hands. No fit-out had occurred. The space had never, as far as the garment business owner could tell, been associated with anyone named Sienna Lopez. I called Sienna from the sidewalk outside that address. She answered. I told her where I was and what I had found. There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, Trevor, I can explain. I said I was listening. She said there had been a problem with the lease, a misunderstanding with the landlord. The original space had fallen through. She had been dealing with it and had not wanted to worry me. She had found another space and was working on the paperwork. I asked her the address of the new space. She said she would send it to me. The message with the address never came. By evening, her phone went to voicemail. By the following morning, it was disconnected. I sat in my apartment that evening and did what I have always done when something goes wrong. I reviewed the facts, not the feelings, the facts. I had spent $395,000 over approximately 11 months. The studio did not exist. The loan agreement was paper, with no legal standing that I had drafted without independent counsel. The education payments had been made directly to me. I had assumed to the university, but I had never confirmed receipt with the institution. The family medical and legal emergencies were unverifiable because I had never asked for documentation and she had never offered it. I had tracked every transfer in my own records with the rigor of a financial executive and had never once verified where the money went after it left my account, because verifying would have required a skepticism that I was not willing to apply to a situation I needed to believe was real. That last part is the truth I have had to sit with. I needed to believe it was real. Not because I was in love with Sienna. I want to be careful about that claim because I am not certain it was love. What I was in love with was the version of myself that existed inside the situation. The man who was doing something meaningful with his money. The man who was building something in a new place. The man who had found a way to spend his resources on something that felt like life, rather than like the maintenance of comfort. Sienna did not steal $395,000 from Trevor Blackstone, the retired executive who was careful with money. She took it from the version of Trevor Blackstone, who was desperately trying to prove that money, applied in the right way, to the right person, in the right context, could finally produce the thing he had been looking for since he was 30 years old and first understood that his salary was growing faster than his contentment. I called Natalie the week after Sienna disappeared. I told her the whole thing. She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Dad, why didn't you tell me sooner?" I said I had not wanted to worry her. She said, "That's not the reason." I said, "No, it wasn't. The real reason was that telling her would have required me to describe what I was doing in language that would have made the problem visible, and I had not wanted it to be visible, because visible meant it could be questioned, and questioned meant I might have to stop." Natalie said, "Are you okay?" I said I was not sure yet. She said, "Okay, what do you need? Not what happened, not how could you, what do you need?" My daughter is a better person than I have been to her over the years, and I am aware of that, and I am working on it. Claire called 2 days later. She is more direct than Natalie, and she asked a different question. She said, "Dad, what were you actually trying to do?" I thought about it honestly before I answered. I said I had been trying to buy a feeling. She said, "What feeling?" I said I wasn't completely sure. She said, "I think you were trying to buy the feeling of mattering, of being important to someone in a real way." I told her that was probably right. She said, "You know you already matter to us." I said I did, but knowing it and feeling it are different things, and I had spent 40 years being too busy to learn the difference. The legal situation is what it is. I filed a police report in the Philippines and connected with an attorney through a referral. Sienna Lopez is a real name attached to real records in the Philippine system. She had worked at the fitness center under her real identity and paid taxes and had a legitimate professional history. What she had constructed around that legitimate identity was a set of financial arrangements that extracted money without any of the mechanisms of fraud that are easily actionable, no forged documents I had ever asked for, no false investment product, no corporate shell. She had taken money I had offered, for purposes I had not verified, and disappeared when the amounts had reached a level where disappearing was more efficient than continuing. The attorney told me this was a challenging case to pursue because so much of the transfer had been voluntary, documented only in my own records, with no paper trail connecting my money to false representations she had made in writing. She had been careful about that. She had never put the studio address in an email. She had never provided enrollment confirmation from the university. She had kept everything verbal and warm and between two people who trusted each other, because that is the kind of arrangement that is nearly impossible to prosecute and almost entirely impossible to recover from financially. I am still in Manila. Gerald thinks I should go home. He is probably right in the practical sense and wrong in the sense that matters more to me right now. Going home means returning to the New York apartment and the Connecticut house and the life that I retired from because it had never managed to feel like what I wanted, and nothing about what happened with Sienna changes the fact that that life did not feel like what I wanted. What it changes is my understanding of why. I spent 40 years believing the shortfall was financial, that I had not yet accumulated enough, spent it in the right ways, directed it at the right things. What I understand now, with the particular clarity that comes from having tested the theory completely and expensively, is that the shortfall was never financial. The hollow feeling I have carried since I was 30 years old and noticed that professional success was not producing the contentment I had expected, that feeling is not a money problem. It never was. The money I gave Sienna did not buy happiness because the thing I was actually reaching for cannot be purchased. Genuine connection, the feeling of mattering to specific people in specific ways, the sense that a day has been lived rather than managed, these are not things that respond to financial input. I knew this, in the way that intelligent people know things they have not yet internalized. I knew it, and I spent $395,000 testing whether, knowing it was right. The test was conclusive. I see Gerald for dinner twice a week. I'm training again at a different fitness center, with a trainer who is professional and competent and with whom I am careful to maintain a relationship that is exactly what it is and nothing else. I have started calling Natalie and Claire without waiting for a reason to call, which sounds like a small thing and is actually significant for a man who spent 4 decades communicating with his daughters, primarily around events and logistics. Natalie said on a call last month that I seemed different. I asked what she meant. She said, more present, like you're actually here when we talk, instead of thinking about something else. I told her I was working on it. She said, I know. I can tell. I am not going to pretend the $395,000 doesn't hurt. It does. It will for a long time. But the amount of money I lost is a fact about what happened, not the whole of what happened. The whole of what happened is that a 69-year-old man spent 40 years trying to solve a feeling with a tool that wasn't designed for it, and then spent 11 months in Manila trying one final time to make the tool work. And the final attempt failed as completely as all the earlier attempts had failed, just more quickly and more expensively. And in the wreckage of that failure I found, not comfort exactly, but clarity. The clarity of a man who has run out of ways to avoid a truth and has finally, at the cost of everything it cost, sat down with it. Money is not the answer. It never was. And I am 70 years old, and I know it now in the way that I know my own name, not as an idea, but as something lived through and arrived at and owned completely. That is worth something. I am still deciding how much.